Hi, and welcome to the 5th episode in our series on the anatomy of a digitally transformed organisation. As per the usual introduction, please have a look at the overview, episode 1, if you haven't watched it already before watching this one. So episode 5, in this episode we're going to be having a look at the integration layer. But first let's put that in context. So this is our overall layered architecture as covered in the overview, most critically a horizontally layered architecture and not a vertical one. In this presentation, as I said, we're focusing on this integration layer. So the integration layer should exist in every digitally transformed organisation. It's almost your ticket to play into the digital world. It's the thing that exposes your services as digital services, technically through something called an API or an application programming interface that enables these services to be invoked electronically, basically over the internet or also internally within your systems. Basically, it's responsible for consuming, exposing services as APIs for consumptions, both by your process layer, so it can participate in your end-to-end processes as we covered in the last episode, but also directly from the channels, including most critically your digital gateway, so that these services can be invoked by external parties. But this layer is also responsible for you consuming the services of your suppliers or your providers to you, so that your business can operate in the ecosystem we all need in the digital age. The days of us doing everything ourselves are pretty much gone. So in order to deliver your services to your customers, you're going to have to consume the services of your suppliers. And in a digitally transformed organization, you need to consume those services digitally via your suppliers' APIs. So that's the overall view of that layer. As I said, probably the simplest definition of it is your ticket to play in the digital world. A couple of things to consider here about whether or not you need a tool for this. Look at a very small organization, potentially not. But once you get to an organization of any scale, you're going to need something like an API management tool, or for very large ones, maybe an enterprise service bus. But critically, this layer is conceptual. It's required. We're not really talking about the physical implementation of this layer, which may change over time, but the requirement for this layer has been there, I would argue, for at least 20 years. It's just for technical implementations have changed over time. So let's look at some of the critical success factors for this particular layer. First is that it's stateless. Stateful is an absolute anti-pattern. You can't retain state across a service invocation. And a little bit more to that, it must also be a whole transaction boundary. In other words, the execution of the service must leave the business in a consistent state, both in a technical sense, in the sense the databases can't be corrupted, but also in a business sense. In other words, the data needs to be logically consistent after the execution of this service. And it also needs to be idempotent, one for you technical nerds to look up, but the services should ideally be idempotent. The other reason why we recommend that you should have a tool here is that this layer is responsible for covering all the common concerns like monitoring, logging, invoking security, and making sure that the service endpoints are appropriately secured, etc. And obviously, it's much easier to do that if you've got a tool that's built for having all those common things, particularly things like monitoring. When you're exposing your services as APIs, one absolute anti-pattern to avoid is to just start creating these APIs without any governance or any control, willy-nilly, for want of a better term, and in particular creating them with different business interfaces. We kind of view that anti-pattern of having different data interfaces on your APIs is sort of today's version of having a completely different look and feel to all your different websites instead of having a consistent feel to them. If you start exposing your APIs with different versions of customer data in every single one of them, it will make it very frustrating for the software community to write things to call to your APIs. And over time, you'll be viewed very badly as an unprofessional organization who can't even have a consistent definition to their APIs. As I said, consistent to equivalent to having an inconsistent user experience on your websites. So critically, one data model across all APIs based upon your common data model. As I alluded to in the last slide, it must support the invocation of external services from other organizations, and of course in the modern world that includes cloud-based services, and of course if your services are instantiated by a solution in the cloud, that must be capable of exposing its services as APIs if you want to play in the digital world. In fact, we go as far as to say for any large organization that wants to digitally transform itself, one of the most critical selection criteria for your solutions, be they cloud-based or on-prem, is that they must expose their services as APIs. We must support the event-driven architecture. So a more typical invocation is, for example, to expose a service for the customers to update their own details, their name, address, etc. That can be invoked typically synchronously. I call the service and it updates the details and returns me whether it's successful or not. But in more advanced organizations, it should support event-driven architecture, particularly for supporting things like machine learning and AI, because these things will raise events that you need to respond to and trigger to, and that requires your integration layer to have support for this event-driven architecture. The final point to make here is, look, we're never going to click our fingers and all of a sudden have every single one of our applications all running in this new beautiful world. So for a period during transition, you will have legacy applications or heritage applications. In Fragile to Agile, we differentiate them. A legacy is an application that we want to get rid of. That's a part of our past, but no longer a part of our future. And a heritage is a long-term application we've used that we do want to persist into the new world. But for legacy, for transition only, and for your heritage applications, so they can persist long-term in your target state, they must be able to expose themselves as APIs, or else our integration layer must provide us a way to get at them more legacy applications that don't have APIs during this transition. That's it for this episode. Hope you found it of value and of interest. One important point to finalize this on is that one of the most critical success factors for this layer is making sure that these services are at the right level of granularity. But that topic is one we'll be covering in our next episode on service providers. Thank you very much.